these lies, and they are lies, that Israel is illegally occupying Palestinian land and Jewish settlers are illegally occupying the West Bank, and that Israel has no right to this land. And under international law, this is completely, absolutely untrue.
Welcome to a new episode of The Salon. My name is Carly van Belsum, and I love to introduce my co-host for today, Leah and Laura. I want to say something else. And I would love to welcome our special guest, Robert Meyer. And Robert Meyer is a prominent Hong Kong-based entrepreneur and retired lawyer. He attended Columbia Law School and joined the international law firm of Coudert Brothers in New York and Hong Kong. Among his many achievements, so many, he co-founded Kadima at Columbia University and the United Jewish Congregation in Hong Kong. He is a director of United Israel Appeal, and that's in Hong Kong, and is a former chairman of Jewish Times Asia. So welcome, Bob. It is so great to have you here. And the topic we are going to speak today about, and you will maybe tell us a lot about the difficult name that is given to so many people to Israel, the stolen land, the problem that comes with that, and the lies around it, the myth and the facts. And you're the master of the facts here as a lawyer, have your legal story. So we can't wait to hear from you what you think about that.
Thank you, Carla. It's a pleasure to be here, and Laura and Leah. I'm going to talk about a little-known international agreement that unfortunately is not promoted by the Israeli government sufficiently and by others, but which is key to understanding the true international legal position of Israel. And it's got a name which is odd because it's called the Mandate for Palestine. You might want to think of it as the Mandate for Palestine Agreement. And I'll get into it in 1 second. As we all know, we hear these lies, and they are lies, that Israel is illegally occupying Palestinian land and Jewish settlers are illegally occupying the West Bank, and that Israel has no right to this land. And under international law, this is completely, absolutely untrue. And I'm going to take you back to the situation in the area after World War I. You'll have to bear with me with a little history lesson, but I'll try to keep it very short and to the point.
It's so important. So important to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. And as Carla knows, at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to find my website, and all the materials that I discuss will be there in findable form. And so there's no need to take any notes if you'll just listen. As we got towards the end of World War I, there were a couple of very interesting developments for the Jewish people. First of all, as you know, the Balfour Declaration was issued on November 2nd, 1917 by the Foreign Minister of Great Britain on behalf of the cabinet, Arthur Balfour. And that was issued as a result of lobbying by the Zionist organization as a thanks to Chaim Weizmann, and also by the British government because they were interested in rallying the support of Jews on the other side of the war, namely, in Germany, and also encouraging those in Russia. And this happened at the time when the British government was led by two Christian Zionists. Balfour was the foreign minister, and Lloyd George was the prime minister. So it was a unique moment in history which was seized. And I'm going to read it to you, at least the important part. It says, it's 67 words. I've cut out the last part of it because it's not relevant to establishing Jewish rights in Palestine. It says, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will do their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. So this is critical because it's the first time any single government in the world accepted the notion that a Jewish national home should be established in our ancestral homeland after it was finally conquered by the Romans 1,800 years prior at the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 136 CE. And there's also discussion about what is a national home. You know, doesn't that mean our enemies have said, well, that they didn't mean a state, and that's not true at all. The term national home was first used in the first Zionist convention, Zionist organization, Zionist Congress in 1897, because at the time the territory of Eretz Yisrael was under the control of the Turks, and it was kind of chutzpah and pushy to say that this should be an independent state. But of course, the Zionist movement was led by Theodor Herzl, who wrote his pamphlet called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, and everyone knew that a state was what was meant. And this was followed up later by the League of Nations and by the Mandate for Palestine. So, and it was the only people mentioned were the Jewish people. There's no mention of any other people. And this is consistent through the three important documents, starting with the Balfour Declaration. The next document was at the end of the war. As you know, the League of Nations was founded, and the League of Nations had to do something with the Turkish colonies or the Turkish possessions of the Arab countries, chiefly Lebanon and Syria, the area of Palestine, and Iraq, which was called Mesopotamia. Yeah. And there was a conference held at San Remo where the Allied powers, and there were five principal powers, which was, by the way, Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and I'm forgetting somebody. But anyway, it excluded the United States because the United States, as you may recall, never joined the League of Nations. And at the San Remo conference was heard the arguments made by the Arabs and made by the Jews as to what to do with this territory. And the San Remo conference established as a resolution, this is not yet an agreement or a legal document, but it's an important next step, the right of the Jews to a national home in Palestine. And they used, and this is important, the identical language of the Balfour Declaration in the San Remo resolution. Okay, so we then get to the Mandate for Palestine. What is the League of Nations trying to do? They have to deal with the former colonies or possessions of the Central Powers, as they were called, namely Germany and Austria-Hungary and Turkey. And they, in the case of the Turkish possessions, they created three so-called Class A mandates. There were different types of mandates. There was a total of 14 covering all possessions. But the three Class A mandates were Class A, which was something positive, because they were deemed to be territories that were close to being independent. They just needed a little shepherding along, and with the idea would be that they would be independent. And those three mandates were, as I've just mentioned, Syria/Lebanon, because that was one area at the time, Palestine, and Mesopotamia or Iraq. And it was the concept, and this was part of really following Woodrow Wilson's 14 points about recognizing the rights of people to have self-determination in these areas. And which people's rights to self-determination were recognized in respect of Palestine. That was only, and I repeat, only the Jewish people. The words were used that were that there's a historical connection between the Jewish people and Palestine or Eretz Yisrael, and it was the desire of the League of Nations to reconstitute this national home, code word state, for the Jewish people. It's important to understand those words. There was nothing created out of thin air. It was not a grant, as it were, by foreign powers. It was not a colonialist enterprise. It was the opposite. It was the decolonialization of the Arab Middle East, including Palestine, from 400 years of Turkish occupation, of Turkish possession. And we then get to the year 1922 and July 24th, where there was written the mandate for Palestine. Now, the term mandate, I don't know why they use the word. It only confuses people today because we don't use that word in connection with international legal documents. Yes. So it's really a trust. It's a trust for the benefit of the peoples in those three Class A mandates or trusts. And there was appointed over each of them a mandatory, which is just another word for a trustee. In the case of Palestine, that mandatory was Great Britain, to the celebration at the time of the Jews, because the government of Lloyd George and Sir Arthur Balfour had been at the forefront of recognizing Jewish rights in the land of Israel, and we certainly would not have wanted any other of the great powers to be the mandatory. Syria, Lebanon had as its mandatory or trustee France, and Mesopotamia had as its mandatory or trustee also Great Britain. Okay, so the mandate for Palestine, which is an agreement, I have in the past called it a treaty, but because it didn't go through the normal treaty ratification process, it's more accurate to call it an international agreement. It was adopted unanimously by the 51 member nations of the League of Nations on July 24th, 1922. And it is valid under international law. It was valid. It remained valid. The League of Nations had at its maximum number about 58 members as of 1934, and it started to go down when they kicked out Germany at the end of the 1930s. So what was this mandate? What did it do? It took the language of the Balfour Declaration and incorporated it into the preamble of this document. And by the way, the document is short. It's 11 pages. You can Google mandate for Palestine document and find it instantly on the internet. And it is, if you didn't know otherwise, you would certainly feel after you read it, and you will feel that way if and when you read it, that is a very Zionist document. The words Zionist, Jew, Jewish are mentioned 14 times in an 11-page document. And it gave only to the Jews national and political rights in the land of Israel, not to any other people. It preserved the religious and civil rights of the non-Jewish inhabitants, as did the starting from the Balfour Declaration, but it recognized the rights of Jews, and it was to encourage Jews, in fact, to come to the land and to reconstitute themselves after 1,800 years. Yeah, which is kind of miraculous, and which is what we did. It was intended that all 14 million Jews in the world at the time would be eligible for citizenship. And I'm going to go through very, very quickly just 6 of the articles that relate to Jewish ownership of the land to give you an idea of, A, what they were doing, but secondly, how specific they were about Jewish rights. For example, it's going to be Articles 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 11. Article 2 says the mandatory will secure the establishment of the Jewish national home as laid down in the preamble. Now, the preamble, as I mentioned to you, was the entire Balfour Declaration wording. And that takes the preamble, which is often not considered part of a legally binding section of an agreement, right into the agreement as part of it. Article 4 says the Zionist organization shall be the appropriate Jewish agency to advise on the establishment of the Jewish national home in the interests of the Jewish population in Palestine, to work with the British. Article 5, no Palestine territory shall be ceded or leased or in any way alienated to the government of any foreign power. This preserves the territorial integrity of the land. Article 6, the administration of Palestine shall facilitate Jewish immigration and encourage close settlement by Jews of the land, including state land and wastelands. And the reason for mentioning state land and wastelands is they were owned by the previous government, namely the Turks, and were not owned privately because Jews had been buying at inflated prices land privately from Turkish, many absent of whom were absentee owners since the 1880s. Article 7 said, a nationality law shall be enacted to facilitate the acquisition of Palestinian citizenship by Jews who take up their permanent residence in Palestine. Once again, no mention of anyone else. And Article 11, the administration may arrange with the Jewish agency to construct or operate public works, service, utilities, and develop the natural resources of the country. When you read the mandate for Palestine, it's impossible to consider that this was being done for any other reason than to recognize and allow Jews to have their homeland. Yeah. And it's erroneous, when we listen to the other side talk about rights of Palestinians and all this stuff, which is not based in law or in fact. And even Jewish people will often look at, for example, the UN resolution of November 30th, 1947, where it was put to the vote to split Palestine actually a second time. I'll get into the first time in just a moment. But it was a General Assembly resolution. Does anybody know that at law, General Assembly resolutions are merely suggestions? They're not law. They have to be adopted and agreed by international agreement or treaty by the sides affected in order to become law. So we've had this, what I call a canon in our arsenal for years, for 101 years to be exact, and it doesn't get used. Let me just mention.
Before you continue, Bob, may I ask a question? Sure. And that's the following. I was always wondered why and that's a little bit of a different topic, but it is related. Why in 1922, the biggest part, 77% of the mandate was given to Iraq, Jordan, Transjordan, and Syria. I mean, why was that decided, that biggest part? Because the 23% that was left over, that would be divided among the Jews, which is a technical, difficult size. So why did they give 77% away and why not 50 or 60? Then today we would have a different problem.
All right, I'll explain it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
This was a pre-cooked deal, okay? It wasn't given to Iraq. It was given to the Hashemites as a way of saying thank you for their support against the Turks in World War I. There were some other ancillary considerations involved. This was done by virtue of Article 25, which is right in the mandate. If you look at Article 25 at the end, it says words to the effect that the British, the mandatory, namely the British government, shall have the right at its election with the consent of the League of Nations to carve out or to, I forget the words used, but to separate the land located on the eastern side of the Jordan River to create a new entity. Of course, that was in there by design. Why was it there? Because the British were sort of feuding with the French as to exactly where the borderlines were of their respective mandates. They didn't want the French in there. And secondly, of course, they wanted to reward the Hashemites. Thirdly, they wanted to secure the land route of the proposed Mosul to Haifa oil pipeline that was under consideration at that time, and I think which was later built. So they carved out, as you just said, 78% of the territory of Palestine. When the Zionist organization met with the League of Nations people earlier, they presented their wish list of what they wanted the new land of Palestine or Israel to look like. They included about 10 miles on the east side of the Jordan River, which went up to the Hejaz Railway, but was designed to recapture the land on the eastern side of the Jordan River, previously occupied in biblical times by 2.5 of the 12 tribes. And it also included land up to the Litani River in southern Lebanon, which was not accepted. It included land in also in the north. These borders were adjusted slightly. It also included a sliver along what's now the current Egyptian-Israel border of land in the Sinai. So it just wasn't accepted at the time. Those were sort of minor, if you will, in the scheme of things, adjustments. But carving out the land on the east side and calling it Transjordan, and then ultimately became the Kingdom of Jordan, was pre-cooked into the mandate. We weren't happy about it. You can make the argument that it was the first Arab-Israeli two-state solution. It was the second state.
Yeah.
Although the language in doing that allowed Jews to live there, as a practical matter, the British and the Hashemites, subsequently the Jordanians, forbade any Jewish residents there. So it was actually Judenrein.
Yeah.
At that time.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to mention, just to carry the mandate forward, so you have some idea. In 1946, when the United Nations was in formation, there was a famous Article 80, which was under consideration and which was adopted. And what it essentially said was that all relations by treaty, by otherwise, affecting states and affecting peoples were still valid and in place. And everyone knew that this Article 80 referred to Palestine. And so, legally, when you trace title, you want to make sure that, first of all, the people who kind of granted the title, if you will, the League of Nations had the right to do so, which they did. Secondly, that continued right up to the United Nations until the actual termination in April of 1948 of the League of Nations. And so this is something that's been around. You may also ask, how come I haven't heard about it? What happened? And it's a sad story. It involves a huge betrayal by the British against us almost immediately after the mandate was given. And it involved a lot of internal Jewish politics, which were very troublesome during they preceded the 1920s and into the 30s until the Holocaust became public. What am I talking about? While Lloyd George and Sir Arthur Balfour were Christian Zionists, the Foreign Office of Britain were not. They were pro-Arab. They were concerned about the Arab people and the countries, and specifically about oil. They were concerned about the Muslim population in India during the war, because they did not want Muslims, of which there were several hundred million, rising up against them in India, both in World War I and in World War II. And the military was not at all, the British military was not at all pro-Jewish. There was a kind of a cabal of officers based in Cairo in the British military, which wanted to do their best to retract from the commitments that you can read in black and white that they made in the mandate for Palestine, and which they did. It went step by step. Although the first governor appointed, I'm not sure that was a title, but was what's his name? Just a minute. I'll have to get back to you. Anyway, was a Jewish Zionist from England. even he began to support the British. He supported the British government in trying to balance things with the Arabs. They appeased the Arabs, and as you can guess by now, it didn't work at all. This particular governor, and I apologize that I can't think of his name.
Doesn't matter. It's fine.
He was the one that actually made the decision to make Hajj Amin al-Husseini the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem.
Yes, that one.
Because he thought, well, the Arabs will see that we're appeasing them, and this gets into my second part of my presentation. In the Arab world, appeasement doesn't work. They only recognize strength. Appeasement is simply a symptom of weakness.
It is a Western thing also. It is a Western way of solving problems, and the approach is like that. It is like know your neighbor or know your counterpart, right? It's different.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Before you continue with the next thing, maybe one of Leah or Laura, do you have a question so far? Because so much wonderful information. You have a question? Or
let me go on a little bit, because I want to mention in our community, in the Jewish community, there was also a big debate. If you look at the discussions during right after, I think it was after the first World Zionist Congress, there were people there were Jews led by Ahad Ha'am. Chaim Weizmann himself was part of this early party. Judah Magnus, who was the founder of the Hebrew University. A lot of Jews who represented, many of whom represented the Jewish populations in the United States, in England, in Great Britain, in France, and in Germany, who were not interested in a Jewish state. Not interested. Why? Because they were interested in helping the community there develop, seeing it develop as a cultural center, a religious center, an educational center, a literary center, all that stuff. That's all fine. They did not want a state because they were afraid that they would be accused of having double loyalty. Yeah. And would be told in America, well, look, you have a state, go to Palestine. What are you doing here in the United States? Same ideas were in Britain, in France. Baron Edmund de Rothschild, who funded a lot of the early settlements, was not in favor of a state. And so they didn't push this at all. But people like Ben Gurion, he was the head of the Yishuv, he knew well about it, but he had to balance interests among the Jewish community to get the money out of the Western countries who were funding the Yishuv, which was still quite impoverished in the 1920s, with the national desires of I would say the majority of the people to have a state. But you might say the very far liberal components at the time were anti-state. Of course, that all changed but once the Holocaust became known. That became a dead issue. But as a result of those two problems, and I'll give you a place where there was a confluence of this. By August 9th, 1929, there was a compromise reached among the Jews. The Jewish people from the Western countries who didn't want a state, but wanted to provide the money, and the Yishuv people in the Yishuv, led by Ben Gurion, agreed on, sort of each modulated their desires, and so the money flowed. And 1 week later, the Arabs got the message. 1 week later, there was the eruption of the Arab revolt in 1929, first in Jerusalem, then in Hebron, where there were some 53 or 4 people massacred horribly. Same thing as what happened, same types of stories, horrible, brutal murders as we saw in southern Israel, and also in Sfat. They knew, so they were following everything. So in any event, we have this document and we need to stand on it. If it means nothing, then let's have the international community say that promises made to the Jews mean nothing, which probably many of us might agree today. There's another important legal point that I just want to raise, because the two main legal points this is under international law. that stand for the proposition that there are complete Jewish rights to the land of Israel as we know it today, and including Judea and Samaria, are one, the mandate for Palestine, which covers this area, but secondly, the international legal doctrine of, and this is Latin I'm speaking, uti possidetis juris, uti possidetis juris. What does that mean? It's a doctrine that actually stems back from Roman law, but is applied in the international legal context about what do we do with areas as to before and after they become independent. And this doctrine has nothing to do with Palestine. It was developed as early as the 1600s. There are cases, particularly in the 1900s and 20th century, in the 1800s and in the 20th century, that dealt with the issue of what happens when a colony becomes independent. Where are the borders? And the simple, clear answer is you take a snapshot at the moment of independence, and whatever the old borders of the colony were or the territory were, those are the new borders of the new state. And the reason why that principle is important is that, notwithstanding, as you know, the November 30th, 1947 resolution, there was no agreement by the Arabs to accept any kind of Arab state, any Arab state or Palestinian state. There was no such thing as Palestinians, except they applied to Jews at the time. And therefore, the declaration by the government of Israel on May 14th, upon the departure of the British, that the state of Israel had been declared, automatically covered the entire mandate for Palestine territory. Of course, when I say it excludes this Transjordan piece, which was not included, but it certainly includes Judea and Samaria, for sure. So there's nothing illegal when you look at these twin arguments. They're very, very strong. The arguments you hear from people in the UN don't know what they're talking about. They lie. They make reference to resolutions which are not binding at all. There are even Security Council resolutions which are not necessarily binding, but these don't go to that. It's absolutely clear under international law, because of these two approaches, the approach of the Mandate for Palestine Agreement, I call it, and the international legal doctrine of uti possidetis juris, that Israel, state of Israel, is entitled to all its land. It's not illegally occupying anything. The only invasion, by the way, that ever took place was by Jordan in 1948, thanks to the help of Britain and John Glub Pasha and several other British commanders who had trained very well the Arab Legion of Jordan, and, as you know, invaded the land of Israel. And at the time of the armistice, had occupied Judea, parts of Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem. And those armistice lines were not international borders. The armistice agreement states unequivocally so. These are simply the lines where the fighting stopped, with the borders to be determined or not determined later. That they're just ceasefire lines. That's it. Jordan had the nerve or the arrogance to call the area of Judea and Samaria the West Bank of the Jordan, which is a joke. I mean, it's ridiculous. Its attempted accession of this land was only recognized by two other countries, Great Britain, thank you very much, and by Pakistan. Even the Arab countries didn't recognize it, just because I think they just didn't want to get mixed up into it. But it was not recognized anywhere else. And of course, after the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israel reconquered it, it should have just declared it. It's not a matter of annexing the land. It's already the land. It's a matter of asserting the sovereign legal jurisdiction of Israel over the entire land.
Yeah. Okay, so wow, that's a lot of information. That's amazing. And I realized over time that I grew up in the Netherlands, as you know, that I always heard in the news, it was spoken about the occupied territories, sometimes disputed, but we really get brainwashed, occupied territory, and how terrible are the Jews that they want to claim Judea and Samaria. And if you put it in perspective with all you shared here, the legal perspective and the whole historical perspective, we realize today that so many people who have an opinion don't know what they're talking about. And that is one of the very frustrating parts, and that's why we invited you too. Then what can we do about it? Because now you see this little this lunatic in England that is cutting the painting of Lord Balfour because of the declaration. You know that you probably saw that in the news. People get crazy, they lose it, they get so aggressive, and it is in so many. And of course, there's something kind of weird sound somewhere. Of course, it is the result of the being brainwashed for so many years. But that's what we say. They think the truth, and they think they have finally a cause that they can fight for and against, and also the inherited anti-Semitic beliefs that is definitely from family to family. I mean, I didn't know it was dormant in such a way. It's like horrific. How can we have conversations with that people will change their mind? How can we do that? Who has?
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah, Laura. Laura, you need to unmute. You need to unmute, Laura.
Sorry. Yeah. So first of all, Bob, thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to do this for us and help us understand better the actual legal history and implications. I have a very big question, and I don't know there's an answer, but it plagues me all the time. If we take the time, and it's very complicated history, it's not simple to explain or understand or digest. But you said when you spoke, we have been sitting on this, I think you said a large canon in our favor. And is it because it's so complicated to explain? Why aren't we figuring it out more? Why aren't we referencing the history and the legality of the ownership and the transition, 48 and up to 48? That's really my biggest question and struggle that I don't understand. Number one, why we're not talking about it more. Is it just because people really don't understand it and it's complex and hard to explain quickly? And why are we sitting on it?
And why doesn't Israel use it too? And in advocating this, that's like
and why don't we come up with a more simple, a more simplistic story or narrative?
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's an answer. I'm just posing that to the group.
It's a good question. I alluded to some of the problems a few minutes ago. In the 20s and 30s, the Yishuv itself was pitted against itself on what was the nature of the settlement going to be. The majority wanted an independent state. Everyone knew that was what was intended by the Jews, most of the Jews, and it was clear, it's absolutely clear from the League of Nations and from the Mandate for Palestine that that was what was intended. All the other states became independent. They only keep questioning us because we're Jews. That's why. Why subsequently wasn't it used? I don't know. I don't know whether it would have been nice, Frank. If you can imagine, if you know the stories of the the Jewish population in the Yishuv on November 30th. Or November 29th, it was November 29th, waiting for this vote by the UN as if it's so important. Legally, actually, was completely unimportant. Yeah. What we should have said is, what Ben-Gurion should have said was shmum earlier and said, we have this mandate. We have this mandate agreement. The international community has recognized the Jewish historical connection and the reconstitution of the Jewish homeland. Yes, we're the only ones who've had it reconstituted after 1,800 years. But you know what? that's actually a great thing. We know it's a great thing. And I recently, I'm off the point slightly, but I recently heard Avi Abalov talk about this subject. I think you might have been even in the audience. He says, when you look at how the far left dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed, they've now put us into oppressor.
Oh, yeah.
That's completely wrong.
Yeah.
There is no group in history that's been oppressed for 1,800 years and longer, frankly, than the Jewish people. And what have we done with it? We should be the poster boys and girls for what oppressed people can do.
Yes.
We went back to our homeland, even though we were kicked out 1,800 years ago, although there was always continuous residence there, particularly in Jerusalem. Secondly, we reestablished the spoken language. We established political forms, communities. We relearned agriculture. We are the poster children for what an oppressed people can do to pull themselves up by their bootstraps with lots of others trying to pull them down and recreate our own country. That's the proper view of what we should be. But anyway, that's looking back.
It's a bit the opposite what happens, because a lot of Jews are afraid and they conform, or the young generation is so also brainwashed. The young Jewish generation is really terrible. We are running a kind of out of time. It was very fascinating to listen to you, and there's so much more to come, I know, but we maybe do that a second time if you would like to. And I think it would be time now for our anti-Semit of the week and our hero of the week. So Leah, may I ask you to start? Because we haven't heard from you much.
Lula.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm sorry.
Why did you choose him? Who is he?
He's saying that Israel's a genocidal state. He's terrible. I mean, he's calling Israel's defending itself and saying it's committing genocide. And Israel was attacked. Period. There's no, it was attacked in the most horrific, vicious form, to the point where if it doesn't protect itself, it's suicide.
Yeah.
Now, of course, every loss of life is a loss of life, but this could end tomorrow if Hamas gave back the for people that are kidnapped and hostage. So again, I think this is a much deeper symptom that we've seen over many years. It's not just now. They don't want us there, and they'll even change the language of the narrative of the word Palestinian to even change our inheritance there.
Yeah.
So
denial. So I heard also on the, I would say, West Bank, Judea and Samaria, that they grind a lot of evidence from the soil. They find things that really shows Jewish evidence there and existence. So it's like destroyed, ground, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so true. It's why we do this, what we do today. Laura, what is your anti-Semitism?
So I have an anti-Semite and a hero. Both are named.
We do one round for anti-Semites and then the round for the heroes.
Okay, well, both mine are named John, but they have a different last name. So we'll start with the anti-Semite. The last name is Cusack. I'm sure you've seen on the news. He's been very vocal, and I think he was called out, and I think it started to resonate for him that, he was going in a direction that might affect him negatively professionally. I don't know that he actually understands that what he's passing along is false and propaganda and ignorant, frankly. So I think now he's done some sort of a retraction, or he made a public statement on his social media, which, we're happy to see that he's retracting it, but I'm not so sure he really understands the nature and the severity of what he's said and done.
He must have gained something by doing so. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Well, I think he was starting to feel it in some of the social media, things that he does that are paid.
Yeah.
And,
there you go.
Or whatever it's called. So that's what I meant when I said professionally.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I choose this week George Galloway. He won the AMPM in England. And I wanted to phrase something, what he said, that he had a huge interview about it, and he gets a lot of followers that agree with him. And he uses a statement so out of context, but the statement has truth to it. His statement is Nazism, the Zionists work together with the Nazis, or the Nazis, they were collaborating. And he posted that, you see, the Zionists are like the same like the Nazis. That's how he brings it. But the truth is, they did. The Zionists have approached the Nazis in order to make a deal to get Jews out of Germany and bring them to Palestine. That was all they tried. Because if you know a little bit about Nazism, they felt so despicable about Jews, they would not do any agreement. The way he positioned is like that that Zionism is so false and is so hypocrite and is so terrible and is like the Nazis. It's very misleading. And guess what? So many people follow it. Okay, please, your turn, Bob.
Well, I nominate as anti-Semite of the week Philip Lazzarini, Director General of UNRWA, which is, as you know, the UN humanitarian aid for Palestinians. UNRWA is really a Hamas organization with a face of Italian and Swiss executives who look pretty for the purpose of raising money for them. So Philippe Lazzarini reported to the UN General Assembly and held a press conference for international media recently in which he claimed that UNRWA had investigated returning detainees held by Israel and found that they were subjected to severe abuse by the Israelis. Sleep deprivation, food deprivation, threats of sexual abuse, threatened by dogs, beatings, humiliation, and so forth, in order to obtain false confessions from the detainees. His allegations are absurd, and they were summarily disputed by Israel. He also issued an internal UNRWA report containing these allegations that was suspiciously somehow leaked to the New York Times. Subsequently, he detailed these erroneous accounts to the General Assembly and later during his hastily convened press conference. It was clearly a transparent ploy to deflect attention away from Pramila Paten's report, who's my heroine of the week. Lazzarini blatantly lies when he claims to have a mandate to conduct this investigation. His contrived excuse for conducting it is that the alleged abuses were discovered when UNRWA distributed humiliation kits to the returning detainees. In other words, he has no mandate from the UN to do this kind of an investigation. Yet, ironically, he claims he has no mandate, on the other hand, to investigate the tunnels that Hamas built under UNRWA premises. At his press conference, a certain journalist from I-24 News asked Lazzarini, how is it possible that UNRWA, when confronted with claims about tunnels under UNRWA, says it does not have police, intelligence services, and cannot conduct investigations into any tunnels under UNRWA, and yet in the midst of war, you can conduct investigations into hundreds of charges against Israelis? So Lazzarini refused to answer this question, declaring he had to leave quickly for the airport. Evidently, Lazzarini is deaf, dumb, and blind when it comes to UNRWA's complicity with Hamas. Incredibly, he failed to check his own electricity bills, since Hamas siphoned off electricity to run their command centers within UNRWA buildings and their tunnels underneath UNRWA premises. Moreover, Lazzarini told the General Assembly, quote, a concerted campaign by Israel and, quote, domestic constituencies of donor states, that's Jews, could sabotage UNRWA's aid operations. Here in Gaza, here Lazzarini engages in classic anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and resorts to code for a Jewish lobby, the domestic constituencies. In his UN press conference, he answered a question from a reporter for Le Monde by again making a remark about donor countries stopping support of UNRWA for domestic reasons, code Jews. He accuses Israel of weaponizing food insecurity as a tool of war by deliberately starving the Gaza population, even though Israeli soldiers have been risking their lives to provide food to Gaza, while Hamas deliberately siphons off food aid to be used by Hamas and then resold to Gazans at higher prices. According to the IDF, over 450 terrorists from Hamas and other terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip are employed by UNRWA. UNRWA teachers were involved in kidnapping and holding Israeli hostages in captivity. And the IDF has released recordings incriminating 2 UNRWA teachers who participated in the October 7th massacre. Lazzarini falsely claims that UNRWA staff were forced to confess to their participation in October 7th under Israeli torture and duress.
I vote Bob's anti-Semite of the week. He's the worst.
Yeah, that is the worst.
Horrible.
Well, I have a hero of the week, if I can say.
Go over to hero. What's your hero?
Republican Congressman Fleischman from Tennessee was accosted, I think, somewhere in Capitol Hill, I'm not sure which building, by a member of Code Pink. And they were trying to get him to say very negative things about Israel. And he stood his ground courageously. I even called up to say, kudos. He refused to put Israel down. He said Israel is the Jewish homeland forever. He kept repeating it, and he stood very strong. He was getting more and more upset. They were very aggressive, and he stood in there for Israel completely. Wow. Every moment. Didn't waver.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
My other John is a harder name to pronounce. John Ondrazik. He's the lead singer of the band Five for Fighting. He's a total hero. He's non-Jewish, and he's written songs in support of Israel. So that was other John.
Oh, wonderful. I would love
better John.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice to have 2 Johns, right?
A good one and a bad one.
So that's it, right? So my hero is Danielle Olfak. She invented the term because there was no response in the world from all the feministic movements about the typical horrific mutilation, abuse, in addition to rape. It was not only rape, but a lot of mutilation and horrific stories from witnesses as well, as hard as it is, or from the pathologist that got all the body parts, etc. No feministic movement spoke out, and Danielle Olfak made the theme "Me Too, unless you're a Jew." Will be the theme of our next session coming week. And that's good. It's a good sentence. It's a sad sentence. But I even have asked to non-Jewish friends in the Netherlands in the beginning of November to sign a petition for the UN, why the UN women didn't do anything, why they didn't say anything. And there were a lot of people, well, let me first see what it is about. Some did it automatically, and some. So the whole thing is, it's very disappointing. But Danielle Olfak, because it's positive, right? The heroine, she made a beautiful stand, started this movement, and yeah, applause for her. Okay, Bob, I'm sure you have a beautiful story about a hero or a heroine.
Well, it's another UN character. This is a good one. My heroine of the week is UN Undersecretary General Pramila Patten. Patten. She is the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence. And she must be commended for her recent fact-finding mission to Israel to investigate the sexual crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th, and her subsequent public report, which will be integrated into the Secretary General's report to be given to the Security Council tomorrow. She was put under severe internal UN and external pressure to adopt the Palestinian narrative denying these atrocities. In Ms. Patten's report and her UN webcast, where she responded to virulently hostile, loaded questions from the international media, Ms. Patten definitively and courageously stood her ground, stating that there was credible evidence that Israeli women and men were raped, mutilated, tortured, and murdered by Hamas. She emphasized that hostages being held by Hamas are in danger themselves of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Her report constituted the most definitive corroboration by an international organization to date that these atrocities occurred.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, wow. Well, we are at the end of our meeting. Thank you so very much, Bob. It was a super pleasure to listen to you. We learned so much. And you have
Thank you.
in the transcript. That was really great. All the best, everybody. And
thank you, Carla, for putting this together and for inviting me.
take care. Sure.
Thank you, everyone.
All of you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Bob.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.